that's an example, I think, of the incongruity that is generated by sense of humour that is aware of the body as the final leveller that brings us all to the same place. It's also an example of what you call a shaggy dog story. It's an elision of narrative. It begins with this idea that he's about to tell us something significant, and then by the end of it, the very narrative has been erased, as though the story made no sense, which is what makes it funny. And it's interesting if you think about it, because narrative is fundamental to our lives. Any of my students here? Harry, give me a definition of narrative.
The fundamental organizing principle of life.
Thank you very much. And how do we know this? Marianne, when is your birthday?
When is my birthday?
Yes.
I have 2.
You would.
I changed my birthday, so my birthday's February 1.
February 1st, I see. Do you remember being born?
No.
No. Does anybody here have any recollection of being born? How do you know you were born on February 1st?
Because I created it. Because I changed my birthday.
Well, they do. Tom!
I realize this is a talk on the Irish, but I thought if Queen Elizabeth could change her birthday, I could change mine. Twice a year.
Fantastic.
Now you see what I have to deal with.
This is probably a work. We should have just had a conversation as a definition of the comic. Expectation, release, lack of expectation. Well, if I was talking to anyone else, I would have been able to establish at this point that they don't remember being born, they don't know when they will die, therefore they don't know when they're in the middle of their story, which is indicative of the fact that if you think about it in comparison, we imagine the story of our lives. We impose a narrative on our life in order to make sense of it. And what Samuel Beckett is doing at this point in his writing is that he's playing around with that narrative structure. He's even playing around with the structure of the way that we think. I'll give you an example. This is again from the novel What? And Mr. Hackett is having a conversation on the bench with a couple, and their name is, I can't remember. So Mr. Hackett is talking to this couple. The couple say, the woman says, "Would you care to hear, Mr. Hackett," said the lady, "about the night that our son was born?" "Oh, do tell him, my dear," said the gentleman. "Well," said the lady, "that morning at breakfast, Jeff turns to me and he says, 'Tetty,' he says, 'Tetty, my pet, I should very much like to invite Thompson, Cream and Colquhoun to help us eat the duck. If I felt sure you feel up to it.' 'Why, my dear,' says I, 'never felt fitter in my life.' Those were my words, were they not?" "I believe they were," said Jeff. "Well," said Tetty, "when Thompson comes into the dining room, followed by Cream and Berry," Colquhoun, I remember, had a previous engagement, "I was already seated at the table. There was nothing strange in that, seeing I was the only lady present. You did not find that strange, did you, my love?" "Certainly not," said Jeff. "Most natural." "The first mouthful of duck had barely passed my lips," said Tetty, "when Larry leapt in my wom." "Your what?" said Mr. Hackett. "My wom," said Tetty. "You know," said Jeff, "her womb." "How embarrassing for you," said Mr. Hackett. "I continued to eat, drink and make light conversation," said Tetty, "and Larry leapt like a salmon." "What an experience for you," said Mr. Hackett. "There were moments, I assure you, when I thought he would tumble out on the floor at my feet." "Merciful heavens, you felt him slipping," said Mr. Hackett. Said Jeff at that moment, "Shall we retire to the billiard room for a game of slosh?" They went. "I went up those stairs, Mr. Hackett," said Tetty, "on my hands and knees, wringing the carpet rods as though they were made of raffia." "You were in such anguish," said Mr. Hackett. 3 minutes later I was a mother." "Unassisted," said Jeff. "I did everything with my own hands," said Tetty. "Everything." "She severed the cord with her teeth," said Jeff, "not having a scissors to her hand. What do you think of that?" "I would have snapped it across my knee if necessary," said Tetty. "That is the thing I often wondered," said Mr. Hackett, "what it feels like to have the string cut." "For the mother or the child," said Jeff. "For the mother," said Mr. Hackett. "I was not found under a cabbage, I believe." "For the mother," said Tetty, "the feeling is one of relief, of great relief, as when the guests depart." With that, I dressed and came downstairs, leading the infant by the hand, who sat at the table and ate the dessert. finish with two classic examples of what we might call Beckett's syntax of weakness. A syntax of weakness where this strange coalescing of opposites takes place. The first is probably a bit like a joke. The closest thing to a joke in Beckett, or at least it's a funny story. I'll show you a clip from a production from Endgame. It's that play I told you about. Hopefully this works. If it doesn't work, I'll read it. There's Ham. The play opens with Ham. It's one of Beckett's favourites. He said, it's one of my favourites. I recognise myself in it still. He said this before he died. There's Ham, who is older, who is blind, in a wheelchair. There's Clove, who is younger, who has some ailment, can't stand it. They're in this room, which looks for all the world like a skull, with two windows. A pair of dustbins behind Ham, in which are his parents. They come up periodically, say a few things, disappear again. You know, think of Swift's metaphor. Think of Swift's metaphor as a modest proposal for eating the Irish children as a metaphor. Ireland, England at that time eating Ireland. Say Samuel Beckett puts Ham's parents in a dustbin. People go, it's cruel, it's unusual, it's wrong, he's sick. It's a metaphor. In that Swift invention, we treat old people like rubbish. Waiting for the show.